Marco Antonio Barrera, the Mexico City warrior who became a boxing superstar.
In Marco Antonio Barrera, you have one of the greatest Mexican fighters of all time. You have one of the greatest fighters of all time.
He can box you. He can go fight you inside. He can do anything he wants to do.
Marco Antonio Barrera doesn't know how to run. He only knows how to fight.
Barrera's Hall of Fame career has been forged by facing the greatest fighters of his generation.
Here comes Barrera!
Now he faces Mexico City's other native son, Juan Manuel Marquez, one of boxing's pound-for-pound best.
Juan Manuel Marquez is like a symphony conductor. He's a guy who has immaculate craft and tremendous counterpunching skills.
Hard right hand by Marquez. Oh, big left hook!
Marquez can box. He can knock you out. This is one hell of a fighter.
But a string of blown and missed opportunities left Marquez in the shadows of the featherweight elite.
And Marquez has been shunned, overlooked, sometimes of his own doing. He is boxing's version of the Black Plague.
He's been a terrific fighter for years, and never once did he face off against Marco Antonio Barrera. How did that happen?
On March 17th, a determined challenger takes his last shot at glory.
This fight really is the defining moment for Juan Manuel Marquez.
He's got to get this win over Marco Antonio Barrera to achieve greatness.
While a boxing legend looks to add to his legacy,
Marco Antonio Barrera wants to prove that he's the greatest fighter in the history of Mexico.
Hit two fighters of this magnitude, two world champions, and they're both in Mexico City. It's going to be all-out war.
This is going to be one hell of a fight.
this is the countdown to Barrera Marquez. Mexico City, a sprawling and ancient metropolis. For Marco Antonio Barrera and Juan Manuel Marquez, it was the birthplace of a boxing dream. A dream steeped in a long and proud tradition of Mexican champions.
Mexican fighters tend to have this warrior mentality, and they built this up over the last 60 years.
Mexican fighters are fighters who come to fight, expect to be fought against, and win with passion.
I think the Mexican fighter closely identifies with his fans, and there's a bond and a certain pride.
Mexicans are so familiar with overcoming all obstacles and odds. You know, hunger is the most important thing in boxing, and if you've ever been hungry, if you grow up poor, you have something to fight for.
For Juan Manuel Marquez, that hunger was instilled growing up in Iztapalapa, one of Mexico City's roughest neighborhoods, alongside his brother Rafael, the world's current 122-pound champion.
Well, Juan Manuel grew up in probably the poorest section of Mexico City. It's a dangerous neighborhood where they had anything from the Mexican mafia to rival gangs.
Rafael Marquez recalls.
Por igual están en la cárcel, si no están muertos, si no muchos que realmente conocemos nosotros están en la cárcel muertos, si no ya poca gente, la verdad está grande, ¿me entiendes? Nadie salió así, o sea, como nosotros realmente que.
You don't understand poor until you understand where he grew up. And then 2-bedroom house, 2 9-by-9-foot bedroom, parents in one bedroom and 8 siblings in the other bedroom.
Qué bonitos, ¿no? Bonitos y a la vez y a la vez tú dices cómo vivir los 8, ¿no? 8 hermanos juntos. Yo creo que es difícil, en todas las familias pasa.
Juan Manuel got into boxing from his father. His father was a very respectable boxer. He had a career record of 35-5. He used to train Juan Manuel and his brother Rafael in his parents' house in the bedroom.
8 años, nos empezaron, papá nos decía, a ver, vénganse para acá, vamos a poner los guantes. Y pues ahí estábamos nosotros y cuando la primera vez me empezó a vendar, pues me gustó. Sentir las vendas y sentir cómo se pega con las vendas, pues me gustó y dije, no, pues de aquí soy.
Juan Manuel and Rafael would spar together all the way through their teenage years. The fighting would get so bad, they would both be bloody. They'd leave, they'd go home, and their parents say, what happened to you guys today?
Sí, boxeábamos muy fuerte, boxeábamos que incluso los dos nos llegamos a sangrar de la nariz, o sea, eran unas guerras y mi papá fue el que optó primero
no vuelven a boxear.
They had a nice foundation, but the father knew if his sons had talent, which they did, the guy to take them to the next level and really make them complete professional fighters would be Nacho.
Nacho Barrera is one of the best boxing trainers of all time.
He's trained 16 world champions, and he does it all in this little tiny gym that, you know, doesn't even look like a boxing gym except for the two big bags in the corner.
At the age of 12, Juan Manuel began a partnership with a legendary Mexican trainer, culminating in an amateur record of 35-1 and 2 Golden Gloves championships. The future seemed bright for the young fighter.
Juan Manuel Marquez was a natural talent. He had boxing in his blood. By being matched with Nacho Barrera, you knew he was going to become a complete professional fighter.
As Juan Manuel Marquez was being primed for stardom, Marco Antonio Barrera was growing up just a few miles away in a completely different world.
Barrera is unusual for any fighter, much less a Mexican fighter as we envision them, because he came out of a middle-class background, used to tell us his ambition was to be a lawyer.
He came from an educated family. His father built sets for television and film, so he grew up wearing good clothes. You know, he grew up eating good food. He grew up going to good schools.
The area he comes from is pretty nice. It's not really conducive to fighting. It's amazing that he even became a boxer.
En la primera sesión de guantes, una golpiza, me hicieron llorar y eso fue lo que me motivó para poder ponerle ganas, más que nada para desquitarme. Me subí a hacer guantes con el mismo niño, le pegué y ahí me seguí yendo.
Barrera would turn pro at 15. 2 years later, he would take his undefeated record to Southern California, where he would quickly establish a reputation for his youth and tenacity.
The baby-faced assassin, Marco Antonio Barrera.
He had this baby-faced look, and he had this wild hair that used to fly around, and he would go in there and he would just, you know, savagely beat up his opponents.
He was the quintessential Mexican warrior.
What a right hand by Marco Antonio Barrera.
He was a pressure fighter, killed the body. He was relentless. He tore the other guy's heart out.
The best little fighters in the world come from Mexico, in my judgment. And right now, this kid may be the best of the best.
After winning his first world title at 21 years old, the highly touted Barrera stepped into a 1996 bout against former world champion Kennedy McKinney.
It was a sensational fight. One of the best give-and-take boxing matches you've ever seen.
Folks, this is about as good as it gets.
That was one of those fights that just opened your eyes.
Both guys are landing shots with regularity. This is just a war.
He just went hammer and tong, back and forth. He just didn't know for sure until finally Barrera emerged in that late round to win the fight.
Here comes Barrera. And that's it.
After Barrera beat Kennedy McKinney, everybody felt that he was the next Julio Cesar Chavez.
Chavez is the great hero of Mexican boxing. He is sort of their Ali.
Now, with his style of fighting and his passion, Barrera was the heir apparent to that great Mexican fighter.
Barrera had blazed a pathway to the top of the boxing world. But for Juan Manuel Marquez, the journey from Golden Gloves champion to professional fighter was anything but smooth.
When Juan Manuel was 18, he was picking oranges out of a tree in Mexico, and he fell, and he did severe damage to his spine and to his lower back. It cost him 2 years of his career. He couldn't turn pro for 2 years.
En ningún momento pensé de renunciar, al contrario, después de la lesión, entrenar bien motivados, empezar una carrera, dije yo, y hay que debutar y vamos a empezar con el pie derecho.
Marquez would have only 8 fights in Mexico before following Barrera's footsteps into Southern California.
What excited me about Marquez early was his technical abilities. You could see right away that this kid has the skills necessary to really be a tremendous, tremendous fighter.
The man didn't make mistakes. And when you gave him a fighter who made mistakes. He punished them unmercifully.
I tell you, Marquez is all over him, hammering away, and Gonzalez is really hurt.
He would maybe not be what you'd call a typical brawler, but I mean, he was definitely willing to fight and definitely willing to throw a lot of punches in his fights, and he won the majority of them by knockout.
Throughout the late 90s, Marquez was the other terrific Mexican featherweight. But somehow or another, he never was able to get into that giant matchup that would really bring him off the page as a fighter.
Marquez would spend 2 years as the mandatory challenger to boxing's hottest sensation, Naseem Hamed, without getting a fight.
I know at one time when I was involved with First Naseem Hamed, I purposely recommended not fighting him.
Hamed unashamedly just ducked him and dodged him.
Naseem Hamed had too much to lose fighting an excellent boxer, puncher, counterpuncher like Marquez. So you know his first title shot came against another guy who was also avoided, a southpaw by the name of Freddie Norwood.
He finally had his shot, and people were ready to explode for Juan Manuel Marquez. All the Mexican press was there. He was expected to win that title.
Norwood may never have fought anybody with the punching power of Marquez.
It was a chance for Marquez to elevate his reputation and become the next great Mexican featherweight, but it didn't happen because it was a horrible, foul-filled fight.
Leg tackle, another clash of heads.
Maybe the trainers ought to get in there and fight.
Marquez got hurt early, and he was very tentative. The whole fight was very tentative.
Another low contact round.
You got to throw some combinations.
Marquez, for whatever reason, pulled back in that fight. He did not really go forward the way that he had fought previous to that. He did not show everything that he had.
And in the end, the judges gave it to Norwood. And Marquez fought, he won the fight, but I also remember him saying, I could have done more. And that was really it. He could have done more to win that fight.
While Marquez found himself fading out of boxing spotlight, Barrera's star kept rising.
Well, a lot of people felt that Barrera was unstoppable. And that's the way it looked like it was going until he ran into Junior Jones.
In 1996, Barrera took on former champion Junior Jones in what was supposed to be another easy victory.
Down he goes! Hard right hand by Junior. The bell ends the round. Barrera is knocked down. The referee stopped the fight.
His fight with Junior Jones was a painful experience for him.
Jones would win a rematch by decision 5 months later. The persona Barrera built up throughout his career was shattered. At the same time, a new Mexican star was poised to take his place on boxing's center stage.
I think a lot of Mexican fans were already in love with Erik Morales, and Morales did portray the traditional profile of the Mexican fighter. Hit and get hit, savage intensity, and of course he was a poor kid from El Norte, the roughest neighborhood in Tijuana.
Morales was just an unstoppable warrior who would find a way to beat anybody.
Marco realized that if he was going to regain a grip on the audience, particularly the Mexican public, he needed to beat Erik Morales.
In 2000, 3 years after the Jones losses, Barrera signed to fight Morales in Las Vegas.
The first Morales-Barrera fight was perceived as the new young king against the old dying king.
What transpired when those two threw down, it was just unbelievable. It was breathtaking to watch.
There is no pretense of defense in this ring.
If savagery in the ring can be beautiful, it was that night.
Here comes Barrera. Here comes Morales. What a fight.
After 12 brutal rounds, Morales was awarded a split decision. Despite the loss, it was apparent Barrera was back.
He had reestablished himself as a top-level prestige fighter, and most importantly, he had gone toe-to-toe, savagely, in an incredibly intense fight against the definitive Mexican fighter of the moment.
After the fight, the first one to show us that we had won or Marco had won the fight was Erik Morales himself.
Yo recuerdo muy bien sus palabras de él. Cuando bajamos del ring, fue a mi vestidor y me puso una medalla y me dijo, esa tú te la ganaste porque fue tu noche. Yo la guardé, no había dicho nada hasta ahorita. Pero pues eso como que me motivaba, ¿no? Para decir, ok, él reconoce que perdió, adelante, tengo para dar más.
Barrera's future was once again bright. 1 year later, he stepped up to the featherweight division to challenge undefeated champion Naseem Hamed.
Prince Naseem Hamed was a heavy favorite, not just because of his global popularity and his unique image and the showmanship, but also because Hamed was regarded as a unique lights-out puncher for the weight.
And his punch seemed almost superhuman for the 126-pound division. So the feeling was that he was going to knock out Barrera.
I've seldom seen Marco excited when a fight gets signed. Like a little boy, I remember clearly when we left the press conference, the fight was signed, he said, "This is what I've always wanted. This is the fight."
Round one is all Barrera, and Prince Naseem takes several power shots.
What he put together was really one of the most compelling pieces of ring artistry that you could ever see. I mean, he dismantled Prince Naseem Hamed round by round, took his career apart in front of all of us.
Big left hand by Barrera inside, stuns Prince Naseem. Right hand on a left by Barrera, rocking Naz back.
Here you had a guy who had been fighting for years as a brawling Mexican-type fighter, and then he suddenly changed. Barrera showed that night that he was a master boxer.
Get the right hand by Barrera. He wants to close the show with authority.
Then gloriously in the 12th round, he turned Naz around and took his head and banged him into the ring post. The crowd roared with appreciation, and Barrera had now risen to a new level. He had come in and constructed a fight plan as carefully and as intellectually and had executed it as well as was humanly possible for that fight.
Marco Antonio Barrera's dominant victory over Naseem Hamed, that had to have been a bitter, painful moment for Juan Manuel Marquez.
Marquez got beat by Norwood, and at that point, Hamed said, okay, well, I'll fight him. And he would have beaten Marco Antonio to that punch. Nacho Beristain overruled that.
Nacho is a great trainer, but he's not a great manager. Nacho has made management decisions where he was basically cutting his nose off, despite his face.
Besides declining to fight Hamed in 2000, Marquez was unable to shake the passive reputation he received from the Freddie Norwood fight.
And really, from that point, Juan Manuel Marquez was in boxing's no man's land. He was plying his trade, he was getting paid a little bit of money. He just had his eyes on the prize.
He had to fight his way up again, and that's what he did.
In 2003, after a decade of professional fighting, Juan Manuel Marquez finally won his elusive title against Manuel Medina. 2 weeks later, brother Rafael won his first belt, and the Marquez brothers became part of boxing history.
But it's rare that brothers become champions. The Spinks brothers, the Klitschko brothers, but I put to you, the Marquez brothers might be the best.
You've got these two brothers, they're close, they've built their reputations together, and they're married to two sisters. That's taking the whole brother thing to a whole new level.
Yo fui el culpable de esto. Yo pues andaba con mi esposa ahorita, en aquel tiempo mi novia, y pues Rafa me dice, oye, su hermana está muy guapa, preséntamela. Pues ahí voy yo de obediente, se la presento, pues empezaron a salir y así fue cuando pues, nació la historia de amor y pues se casaron.
Probably no other brother combo could match that particular, matrimonial attribute as well.
As Marquez's career soared, so did Barrera's. In 2002, Marco Antonio won the highly anticipated rematch against Eric Morales. However, the following year, Barrera's reign at the top would end with a stunning loss to Manny Pacquiao.
Pacquiao emerged as this dynamic, fury-filled force of nature.
He was young and crazy and cockstrong, and he wanted to fight anybody, and he wasn't afraid to fight a guy like Marquez, and the fight was made.
Just 6 months after Barrera's loss, Marquez would face the Filipino sensation.
And he fires the straight left hand, and there's the punching power.
Pacquiao just shocked him.
Another one now, and down he goes now. His is why we use the word sensation.
In the first round against Manny Pacquiao, Juan Manuel was knocked down 3 times.
And I'm not sure Juan Manuel will be able to get up.
And a lot of people are thinking, yo, the fight's over.
It only took him 1 round. All of a sudden, he figured out the left hand. He said, okay, I'm not going to get hit with that left hand anymore.
Marquez coming back with a left and a right into the zone.
Marquez is making the stand of his life.
Within 2 or 3 rounds, he's completely reversed the momentum of the fight, and he's playing Pacquiao like a violin.
And it could be the comeback of a lifetime for Juan Manuel Marquez.
For those 11 rounds after that disastrous first round, Marquez showed the kind of warrior instincts and heart and tenacity that he really has in that fight.
After 12 furious rounds, the fight ended in a disputed draw. What Marquez did win was universal respect.
I don't think people really got to see what was beating, you know, beneath his breastplate until the Manny Pacquiao fight. It was the best thing that ever happened to him because people finally knew who he was.
Meanwhile, Barrera's convincing loss to Pacquiao had left many questioning his future.
Marco Antonio Barrera taking by far the worst physical beating of his career.
Barrera basically was left in a heap at the end of that fight. That's the kind of beating that's hard to come back from.
Barrera appeared at that moment to many of us, perhaps to be done. But of course, there's a lot of depth in Marco Antonio Barrera.
Marco is a very proud fighter, very proud person. And that fire lights up when the odds are against him.
Make no mistake about Marco Antonio Barrera. He can show you this stoic front, but he heats up a lot.
I think he is a gentleman as long as you show him the same respect. But once that line is crossed, he drops the whole gentleman thing.
It's my town.
Come on, guys. He's a guy with a lot of pride, and you see that when he's matched up with somebody else who also has a lot of pride. Eric Morales brought out the best of Marco Antonio Barrera.
With their 2 legendary fights, Barrera and Morales had developed one of boxing's most heated and personal rivalries. In November of 2004, they squared off in Las Vegas to settle the score, with Barrera the underdog.
Todo lo contrario, me escogieron porque pensaron que ya estaba yo terminado y quisieron agarrar la tercera pelea pues para poder decir ellos enterrarlo, ¿no? Pero pues cuál fue su sorpresa que pues ni acabado ni retirado le dimos duro.
Well, if Morales thought Barrera was a shot item after the knockout loss to Pacquiao, he has learned already that isn't the case.
It's pretty hard to choose whether the first Barrera-Morales fight or the third Barrera-Morales fight is the greatest. Both are 12 rounds of savage intensity.
In Las Vegas, for the 2 greatest Mexican fighters of their generation.
And this time, for the first time, even though by a small margin, there's a pretty clear winner.
And new champion of the world, Marco Antonio.
To be at the Morales-Barrera fights was to witness greatness in the ring.
Never has there been a trilogy which was more consistently entertaining and exciting round by round by round than the 36 rounds they produced.
And unlike other great trilogies or multi-fight series, you had 2 fighters who really disliked each other and have that same feeling to this day.
No, yo no lo odio, no más recibo a la gente con el mismo cariño. Simplemente que chingue a su madre, así de simple.
Y no, por el momento al contrario, yo lo respeto, yo siempre lo voy a admirar porque gracias a él pusimos un brinco enorme en el boxeo mexicano.
In Marco Antonio Barrera, you have one of the greatest Mexican fighters of all time. You have one of the greatest fighters of all time. And he's given everything to the sport.
Barrera has been good enough to have cast a long shadow, so he's always overshadowed those who were behind him. And here is Marquez, now fighting to get out of that shadow.
In the years following his memorable performance against Manny Pacquiao, Juan Manuel Marquez would once again be plagued by bad choices and missed opportunities.
He could have fought Manny Pacquiao in the rematch for a bigger purse than he ever made before, but they decided not to go ahead with it. Nacho instead took a fight for him with Chris John in Indonesia. He fights for $30,000. He ends up losing the fight.
These were terrible decisions, and Juan Manuel Marquez, right now where his career stands is he's one of those could-have-been fighters.
You would hope that Marquez can seize this opportunity, maybe the last opportunity, to make a statement.
Juan Manuel Marquez, he's got to have it. He's got to get this win over Marco Antonio Barrera to achieve greatness, and I think that's going to lead to a great fight between these two.
It's said that Marquez is hungrier, but hunger is one thing, pride's another. Barrera is fighting for pride. Pride is being the greatest Mexican fighter.
I'm sure that Marquez will look at Barrera's 2 fights against Rocky Juarez and say, hey, he had trouble with a young, strong puncher. Maybe I should consider being more aggressive than I've been.
People have written off Marco Antonio Barrera more times than the national debt. And every time he has a bad or fair performance, we think that's it. And then he comes back with a great performance.
Barrera will do whatever it takes to win. We don't yet know that about Marquez.
On March 17th, the countdown concludes, and 2 of boxing's best prepare for battle.
Between the two, they've had 117 fights. Between the two, they've won 109.
We're going to see who's the better boxer. We're going to see who's the better warrior between Barrera and Marquez.
Es una pelea importante, una gran pelea que la estamos casi soñando con ella a diario.
Él ni soñando va a poder lograr ganarnos. Me dan ganas de pegarle 12 rounds para que se acuerde de mí después de la pelea.
When you pit 2 fighters of this magnitude, 2 world champions, and they're both in Mexico City, it's going to be all-out war.
These are 2 of the master craftsmen of their era. 2 guys who've had great careers in one of the most passionate corners of the culture, Mexican boxing. Let's have the opening bell right now.